Hello, protocols, packets, and programs. It's a new year and a new vision for Appsec. Let's have designs and defaults that minimize flaws and reduce the damage that an exploit can cause. Let's have designs and defaults built in a cloud and only use whatever least privileges are allowed. Let's have designs and defaults that kill off vuln classes and do away with secure coding guides pulled out of checklists. Which means this week we chat with John about the year ahead, what we want to cover, what we think we cover, and why those might not be the same things. In the news segment, 23andMe shifts blame, an update on DRM on a train, abusing Google's OAuth 2, faster TLS in Rust, AI and OSINT, and more. Stay secure and stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show to learn the latest tools and techniques to understand DevOps, applications, and the cloud. Your trusted source for the latest Appsec news. It's time for Application Security Weekly.
Business Security Weekly is live streamed and recorded on Mondays at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Each week, we address the challenges facing CISOs through our guest interviews, including former and active CISOs. Our news segment is focused on leadership and communication to better help security leaders translate and communicate security risks into business risks. Jason Albuquerque, Ben Carr, Tyler Robinson, and others add their expertise to the conversation. I'm Matt Alderman, and I hope you search for Business Security Weekly in your favorite podcast catcher and subscribe to download our latest content.
This is episode 268, recorded January 8th, 2024. We'll see how many times I get the year right this year. I am your host, Mike Shima, stumbling over a couple intros, dusting off cobwebs after the break. But also after the break, we have here John Kinsella. John, welcome back.
Still
Happy
alive.
New Year.
Made it to another year. Happy New Year. I think you've got at least 10 or 20 tries to get the 2024 part, so we'll get there.
Okay. I'm going to need more than, closer to that 20 end than 10. Let's see. But here's something about 2023, because cyber threats are evolving. Is your organization keeping up? The 2023 Cybersecurity Year in Review is here. Uncover the latest challenges and strategic responses in CRA's 2023 Cybersecurity Year in Review, sponsored by RSA Conference. From the impact of generative AI to the risks of ransomware to navigating new SEC rulings, get ahead for 2024 with your free copy at securityweekly.com/year-in-review 2023. And because it is now 2024, John, and a whole new year, this actually also marks the 6th anniversary of Application Security Weekly.
Wow.
Keith Hoodlet started things off with Paul Asadorian on January 5th, 5 years ago. So that would be, or 6 years ago now, sorry. So that'd be 2018, if I'm doing my math correct today. But so we want to thank them for kicking things off, as well as thanking all of our listeners for sticking around for so long. And I thought one of the things, in addition to saying thank you once more to all of our listeners, is getting an idea, what do we want to talk about this year? Because 2023, we had vulns, we had CVEs, we didn't have another Log4j or a SolarWinds, which I'm not going to cry about. But
still recovering from the last one. It's going to be a few more years.
It's going to be a while, indeed. But one of the things we also did, we asked every one of our guests to describe AppSec in 3 words. And you had a fun response there at the very end. I'm curious if you had a favorite. I shared a list, and I forgot to post a list in our show notes so that everybody could see. But of those 3 words, constraints are always kind of fun. Did you have a favorite or something that felt informative to you or felt that spoke to you about AppSec?
Beside Application Security Weekly? Yeah, the two of us were waiting most of last year for somebody to say that. But that's okay. I don't know. I've got the list up I'm going through. I did look at it earlier. And part of, I'm going to try and do something interesting on this episode, and that's, there's a decent amount of snark in me, unfortunately, from around AppSec. And it's not just funny, haha. I'm jaded. I've been in this industry for quite a while now, right? We both have. I used to read, not that Frac was AppSec, it is in a way, but I used to read Frac when it came out when I was in college in the late 90s. I've seen some of these vendors come and go. I've seen them change their stunts every year. So yeah, there's a good chunk of me that's jaded, and that's why I'm not doing application security as a startup right now. But all that said, I mean, there's some interesting ones. Cheaper than alternatives, a necessary evil.
That was a good one from Lena.
Yeah, developers be responsible. I don't know who said this one. I wish we had attributions on these. So what's next? I think that's pretty good. But I think, what I sort of want to get to is, while there's a lot of negatives going on in the world, there's a lot of sort of things we can talk about snarky and be sort of in that sort of direction about. I think at the same time, though, a lot of these things, there's a chance for positivity, and like, how do we focus on making those improvements, as you said in the intro, around like, secure by default and things like that. Would I call it the most important part? That was one of the last ones from last year. I have a hard time doing that. And parts also, what's interesting to me right now is, I'm back in a senior management role, watching my development teams sort of both make awesome product, but also occasionally seeing security come up and go, hi, I'm from AppSec, I'm here to help. And they're also great teams. I'm not trying to bash anyone, but like, I very definitely in that manager role get that sort of tug of war of like, they want something fixed versus me. I want to get this product out the door. And most of us are constrained by resources over the last year or two, with the economy doing its various different patterns. So it's like, I can't just like hire 3 more developers and say, you go fix the AppSec stuff and the rest of my team's going to do things. So there's that definite balance there. Business sane software just caught my attention. A lot of these are really good. So we definitely will, we obviously record before we post. So we'll get this word list out for people to go and review on the website. Complex, diverse, fluid. I think that's a pretty accurate one. We're humans, right? Like the core issue with application security is we are humans. Adrian Snabria was trying to bait us and posted a tweet from his high tweetness. I'm not even going to say his name. But the comment he made was, done right, a compiler should be able to figure out type automatically. It's not that hard. And, this is sort of beside uselessness. I mean, if it was that easy, it would have happened a long time ago. But the reason I'm bringing this in here is it's a human thing. And like, as long as we have something to do with this, we're going to figure out new ways to both build a better version of us. I won't say idiots, but also a better way to fix these things. So I don't know, job security is only 2 words, but better job security.
I like that. How much can a secure code be, John? $10? Yeah. But I went through the list too. I forgot. I didn't want to throw in the attributions yet when I shared the list because I didn't want to bias your thinking. But the complex, diverse, and fluid, that came from Kristen Bell. And the so what's next? I did like that one. That was from Ben Sadiapur. We were talking about bug bounties with him. But business safe software was something that also like kind of spoke to me a little bit because it had the idea of business in there rather than let's just talk about vulns. Software sooner, safer. That came from Shannon Leitz. That is a kind of a better way of saying shift left without saying shift left. But I think in the spirit of where you were going for of, a little bit jaded. Frac, old issues had, web CGI flaws was a good famous AppSec one from Frac, from a Rainforest puppy. And so, this is 20, 30 years ago, if not more, that Frac is. And Kelly Shortridge, her 3 words were adapt, learn, and evolve. And I think that is probably one of the better ways to capture the idea that Snark is fun. Being jaded and seeing like we've had top 10 lists for a long time, or we've had a lot of just fix all the vulns and attitudes like that really haven't made an impact. I think it's safe to say. And that I think is capturing the idea that AppSec maybe just needs to be called something else. So we can also shed some of that baggage. But that evolve part is what I'm going for.
What's also really interesting about this, as you're saying, tools come and go and sometimes they work better than others. Oh man, I'm guessing almost never is someone coming out with a tool that they're like, this isn't going to work, but we're going to make a ton of money off of it, or we're going to fool people into using it, right? Like everyone who's building these tools, as much as I'm saying like, oh, there's another tool or another vendor, there's usually really good intentions behind this. The problem is, as you start building that tool from someone who's done this, as you start building that tool, what starts off as a really great, I've figured out the way to do it that no one else has figured out before. As you start getting into the details further, you're like, oh, that I forgot about that, or I didn't think of that, or that's harder to solve, or whatever have you. Or hey, there's a better idiot over there, and like that's sort of what gets us into this place where we have these tools which cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, but still often don't fix something we think is sort of basic. And I think what's, just sort of now just riffing off this, but like it comes back to, if we have decent humans, I think doing code reviews or actually looking at things. And I'm not saying that's the end all be all, but like humans checking humans, I think is frequently going to be a lot better than some very static tool, which could be a year or 2 or 3 old, trying to figure out what a human did and if that's good or bad. But I just want to clarify there, like, yeah, when I'm talking about, oh my God, horrible vendors, no, it's I think we creep towards horribleness, and you can get Adrian and I going on this and the whole marketing loop, but that's usually not the intention. So, yeah, but anyways, I interrupted you.
No, and yeah, that's true. Listeners, if you don't get enough of John on ASW, go check out Enterprise Security Weekly every once in a while, because he guests over there and has some fun conversation with Adrian, which we will also get. Speaking of things to look forward to, I wanted to shift towards that. We'll try to get Adrian back as a guest, because we had some fun talking about myths in InfoSec. I'm pretty sure myths haven't gone away. And I also want to use this as a chance to figure out, what are we looking forward to, or what do we think we want to talk about this year, John? Not so much the prognostication, but more of what are fruitful ways that our education, that we want to see AppSec moving towards.
I'm curious your thoughts on this. We cover a lot before the show, as folks know, but we often don't sort of share our viewpoints on these type of things. For me, I'm going to go sort of positive in a way, from the point of view, I want to both sort of reinforce more of the positive things that are out there that are happening. So while we've got some juicy stories coming through in the news about, like, negligence and other sort of the standard type of things, which are fun to talk about and those are fun to talk about. I'd love to try and focus a little more on, hey, what are people doing that, we haven't heard about, maybe let's pick a company and get a list of, and some of this stuff takes us work, because they're not just like simple headlines for us to grab, but hey, let's figure out which top 10 companies have the largest amount of source code. Which of those have we talked about least in the headlines, right? Like, who's probably doing a pretty good job AppSec-wise? And then can we find those guys talking? Because often the case is maybe not, but sometimes, yeah. What else? We started doing some stuff with tools last year. I think one of the things is, as I was saying, there's new tools coming out, new things you can play with. Frequently the tools which are good because they've got a lot of code behind them. A lot of cash behind them, creating that code to make them good. And there's a solid team that's building them. So I don't want to put us in a space of tool review or tool comparison, but it'd be interesting to see if is there a needle there we can thread somehow? I don't know. That could be interesting to look at. And as usual, listeners, we'd love feedback on thoughts on this stuff.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And if I can add that too, for the listener feedback part, that's one of the reasons I wanted to kind of kick the year off in this manner. But as you were pointing out, where are the teams out there that aren't, their AppSec folks aren't showing up at every single DEF CON or B-Sides or OWASP conference, and basically haven't had a chance, or haven't had a venue, or perhaps just haven't felt like talking about it openly a lot. These are the types of guests we would love to get. So having referrals, we've had guests refer other guests, and it's been great from my perspective to get voices we haven't heard from before. So I want to amplify that. One of the things on my list too was talking about tools, but I'm always curious, and I had written down specifically actually Zap and Burp. There's basically 2 ways to get humans using tools to look at web applications, and trying to figure out what are some fun ways to talk about those, or what are the informative ways that our listeners would be curious about. Another thing that I was looking forward to or wanted to talk about would be WebAssembly. And I kind of made a LinkedIn post about this at the end of the year, that we didn't really see that many articles about it being adopted, about being used too much. I would love to see it being used, because it's a chance to talk about some security primitives, some security concepts like sandboxing, isolation. Like, what if we didn't even have an API that exposed the underlying file system. We wouldn't have directory traversal. Is the idea that we can have something that is getting rid of vuln classes. And so it's a little bit of talk about the tech side as well as the more, I was going to say generic, but maybe more fundamental security by design aspects of that. So.
It's funny. I was thinking about part of that when I was quoting his tweetness. It's like, yeah, you can make a compiler do secure things if the actual size of the language becomes smaller, to the point of not being useful. But yeah, I think there's some interesting things there. It's how do we, and it obviously needs more thoughts on my point when I'm thinking about it like this, but it's how do we highlight a different side of things, right? It's not so much AppSec in 3 words is great. I know a lot of those were sort of really head scratchers to me in a good way, and hopefully to other people, like give you moments like think up the clouds and go, it's an interesting way to think about it. But what does a 30-minute interview or news segment, or call it an hour overall, how can we bring an interesting viewpoint to get people to think about things in a different way, maybe help them at their job or maybe help them in their career, or convince them that it's not that horrible that they need to run away and never come back. It's so that's sort of where my head's at. Like, how can we obviously want to entertain, or I try to entertain. But at the same time, can we sort of shift that light around and look at this thing that we've been talking about for 6 years? Can we look at it from a different point of view, or what's new and different and interesting? So I think that's what at least my goal is for the year.
Yeah, and I like that goal. And I think that's also, again, we're asking listeners, let us know what are the areas that we can do that, can convey that for you, because it's the idea of, we don't want to just talk about like write secure code and end there. We're trying to avoid platitudes. And that's the thing. I had another bullet point for what to talk about in this episode. And this segment is, what are we not looking forward to? And 2 things I'll say right off the bat. Again, trying to be constructive criticism, we'll say. Shifting. Don't care about shifting left, shifting right, shifting forward. Let's just talk about placing security effectively, perhaps. And the other thing is, for those of you who read Matt Levine and his newsletter, everything is security fraud, which is securities fraud, which is a great in-joke amongst his newsletter. I suspect that for us, everything is supply chain. I've seen a lot of articles where suddenly something is just, this is a supply chain problem, a supply chain vuln. And it's like, well, maybe yes, but it's a little bit diluting what the meaning we have of supply chain, or diluting it in a way that it's just not useful to even use the words supply chain. So I'm going to try to avoid those types of platitudes or cliches on my part. That's what I'm not looking forward to this year.
I had a good one about halfway through that and I lost it. I think it'll come back at some point, 2-3 episodes. I think it's. I'm trying to avoid the obvious, the generics, and sort of go a little bit deeper. We're obviously going to be talking a lot about AI this year. Public relations. I'm not looking forward to that. Our listeners don't see, if you listen to us or well, if you watch TechCrunch or most other things out there, most people, if you want to call us journalists, call us media people. We get a lot of PR folks coming at us with great ideas, which usually aren't. I don't think there's much, honestly, in AppSec that I'm really not looking forward to. Okay. I think one thing we have seen, so the biggest one is those stats around stuff which doesn't get fixed. That drives me absolutely bonkers. But beside that, if you think through, most of what we actually talk about core AppSec, I don't have, this sounds weird to say, I don't have a problem with it. I think core AppSec I still believe in. It comes down to how is that implemented, or when is it implemented, or what are the arguments to not implement it. We've had 1 or 2 guests over the years that make comments about, for example, open source is the problem. I think that train left the station about 15 years ago. But like things like that, where you see people who are like coming in from different angles, sort of trying to tell us those of us who either been in space a while or sort of what is nowadays common sense. Those things I don't look forward to. But I think that's becoming less and less. So yeah, I don't know. There's not a lot of negatives to me, at least. Funny. That's it good. Sounds weird to say, Mike, but like,
wow, it's a whole new year for John. But I think I'm curious too. Maybe I want to follow up on the core AppSec, and you made an earlier comment too about humans doing code reviews, looking at code, looking at secure code. I'm curious. Maybe let's talk a little bit about what is core AppSec to you, because I'm going to suspect it's not just running scanners, running tools, but what would be some of those items?
I mean, end of day for me, it probably comes down to 3 or 4 things. It's really I think the vast majority of the things we see can be dealt with by just better input sanitization and output encoding. I think if I just say those 2 things and stop, that doesn't solve everything. Don't get me wrong, but like based off that, buffer overflow should be able to go away. Injection type attacks should be able to go away. I think that might sort of kill off most of your directory traversals. Right? So I think there's other aspects around which are equally important. I believe very wholeheartedly in typed languages. I think there's some, it's probably, it's not a list in my head, but obviously there's a few things come to mind, but like that sense to me of core AppSec, it doesn't matter beside the type part, none of that matters what language you're using, what I just said.
Yes.
There's still going to, if there's an issue in the language itself or in one of the frameworks you're using, then, at that point you've got shot. I'm not going to say you shot yourself, but I think a lot of the issues are, they start coming from other aspects of that, or maybe bring the human back to it. Like, are they not thinking through, again, input or output? Okay, am I writing something to a log file or output to screen that someone can manipulate in a way? Because that's another way to think about it. Is like, go back and look at it from a threat modeling aspect of like, there's a human coming at me. They're trying to figure out how to get in or what they can manipulate to get there. Okay, well, how can I just stop those things on a perimeter? It's sort of a bit of a perimeter viewpoint, I think, which might not be the best in 2024. But at the same time, if that perimeter is still the size of whatever your microservice is, sort of like firewalls, when enterprise firewall went away, you just put a firewall around the instance or the function, what have you. That's a form of thinking. I'm not saying WAF, but it could be. But I don't know, that's where my thought comes quickly.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, are you saying, and we're turning this to an interview with John Kinsella, would you be, instead of WAF, would be API gateway be a direction you're going with that in a way? Or is that something still a different, edge security?
I like them. I mean, for me, in the last, 3, 4, 5 years, I've become very fond of API gateways, no matter the brand. It's a proxy, right? It depends how they're done, but usually it's a proxy. So you've got a point where hopefully that device actually understands how to do that input sanitization. You've defined a set of rules usually for where it's going to, unless you've got some sort of wildcard thing going on. And then you've got, it's usually a synchronous path in and out of the device, usually not async. So there's no sort of bypasses going on. It's automatically checking the health. Well, usually it's automatically checking the health of the services behind it. So it's not sending traffic to somewhere where it shouldn't be going. I think in many ways, it does scratch a lot of itches for me. Do your TLS offloading, whether you consider that good or bad, it can do it. If you're using them in a little more diligent manner, you're getting your API documentation generated at the same time. So, I mean, a lot of what we're talking about here, as you first asked that question, the first thought in my head was like, well, yeah, I believe in API-based services. So if you don't have that sort of viewpoint or need where you don't have a clear, I guess when I say API should go clear, still I'm thinking like a JSON or a YAML API, like over a modern HTTP. So if you're doing something weird in elsewise, like, I don't know, threads comes to mind, or some sort of IoT thing, then that's probably not going to be as useful to you. But for modern web services, yeah.
And I like that, expanding on that, because one of the things that I was also trying to avoid this year is and we was talking about Rust too much, or memory safety. And of course, we do have a news article coming up about it. But there's a whole world of web application vulns that had nothing to do with memory safety. And so this is a little bit repeating myself, that there are many other vulns out there and types that we want to figure out. What are the frameworks? What can we do? I think to create a framework that developers use, because it solves some of their problems in addition to security, that does the input validation, the output encoding. That basically kills off those vuln classes. And I'm probably going to be repeating vuln classes and security by design more often than not throughout the year. So update your bingo cards. That will be one of my New Year's resolutions. Don't know, John, if you made any New Year's resolutions as well for 2024.
I didn't. I'm backing it for 30 seconds here. I just brought up my favorite webpage, the OWASP Top 10. And I'm just thinking through, like, based off what I saw, what we were just talking about. Okay, access control. We didn't. Well, you could sort of say that input sanitization sort of deals with access control. It's a bit of a stretch. Cryptographic failures, that's separate. We know what I think about that. Super important. Just don't ask me to do it. Injection gets cured by insecure design. That's sort of always going to be an issue. Security misconfig. That's, that should be solved by your. In my mind, that should be solved by a modern deployment process. Vulnerable and outdated components. I'd say that again, but
supply chain.
Yeah, I'm still irked by that stat from, I think it was our first recording in December, where, 60% of developers never update their libraries after they're put in place. That just blows my mind. Identification, authentication, blah, blah. That same as number one. I'm hand waving, but work with me. Software data integrity failures, sort of supply chain. No, maybe not. That's security logging and monitoring. Again, output. Server-side request forgery, sort of combination of input and output. So, I mean, yeah, it's, again, I don't mean to be hand wavy, but I think if you focus on what I consider those core things, a lot of that stuff goes away. Anyways, you were asking about a very lovely question, what my New Year's Eve resolution or New Year's resolution, don't have any, was my first response. And that was my response over the weekend. I started thinking about it this morning. And I think, again, for me in the role I'm in now, what it comes to me is how can I empower others, either at work or elsewise? And this goes to our listeners. Like, listeners occasionally reach out to me, but I try to make time when I can. I'm super busy right now, but I will try to make time. Is can I help someone figure out what their career is, or can I sort of? It comes down to, I think there's a phrase, it might even be in my LinkedIn, of like, I want others to benefit from. I want others to learn from mistakes I've made, and it comes back to that same thing, right? Can I help someone get on stage and do a talk in a good way? We've talked about presentations. Can I help people figure out what needs to be fixed in AppSec, or where they should be focusing their time? So it's, and then on top of that, there's just general software engineering, software development. Can I help someone become a better software developer? Can I help them work better with other teams? Can I help them take feedback better, or critical feedback, and actually learn off that and benefit and grow themselves as a person or as a developer? So yeah, it's this sort of, that's sort of where my head is. It's not something I actually thought through, but it's sort of, as I'm relatively new in a gig, these are the things I think about and sort of what I want to try and focus on for next year or two. So yeah, partially AppSec, partially not.
That's a great list. And I think one of the things that we can benefit, that show would benefit from, is having you having listeners bring a lot of those questions to you, and then having you help scale those responses by talking about on the show. So some of the things we had for a while, some, question of the week, I didn't do a good job keeping that going, but there's some things we could bring back up to help spread that type of insight and advice, because I'm sure I don't know that you'll run out of mistakes you've made, but if you ever do, I can. I've got a few of my own to help round out that number. No worries.
But at the same time on that, I'm very curious to hear, like, where your head is on that. What are you sort of looking for or thinking about into a new year, either from a pure resolution point of view or just sort of a train of thought?
Yeah, and so for me, well, one fun part was to continue the intros to keep everybody entertained for Application Security Weekly. But another part was to figure out what to talk about, honestly, on the show, in the sense of there's more than just how to find a particular vuln or how to exploit cross-site scripting in fun and different ways. And that's why I've brought in the ideas of documentation, trying to make that interesting and sexy, if you will. Documentation can be interesting, but it's also relevant, I think. Same with talking about presentations, giving presentations. They're great at OWASP, B-sides, for example, but also internally at organizations. So, and I think one of the things that I'm trying to look for is to find out what are people talking about in the sense of what does it mean to do secure coding? What does security by design actually mean? What does threat modeling look like? Do we need to have like all of our developers do threat modeling for an hour every time they write some code? Or do we just need to teach some of that kind of attacker mindset as they do their normal development in creating design docs? So I think if I try to boil it down to one word, is making sure we have some good relevance for what we're talking about that is pushing AppSec forward to where we would like to see it be, rather than just yet another OWASP top 10 list. It's more of, this is what a framework is, or this is what OpenSSF is doing with their list of most used open source projects, most impactful. Maybe we take a look at that list and talk to some of the developers, find out what are the security problems you've run into. You've been underfunded, we can already say, because you're open source, but you've been underfunded in just the hours in the day that you have. How do you decide what to work on? So that's some of where my mind is going for this year.
And I think I'll throw out a pause. I don't know if this is right or wrong, but I'll allow the listeners to feedback and comment and tell me I'm wrong. If we focus more on improving application security in open source, and by that what that means is we almost never get additional AppSec people in open source, right? It's developers who have to care about who actually improve. And there's a really small group of security people trying their best to, as you said, scale and help everyone. But if we're able to continue improving AppSec in open source, will that then flow into the enterprises from the point of view of either the processes are better or the defaults are there leave it there. The defaults are there, or is there a trickle down effect there? I know that particular phrase of words might sort of trigger some folks, but is there some sort of a trickle of if we're able to focus some of our out of office time on those other areas, will that benefit us all overall? Don't know.
We'll find out throughout the year. Listeners, let us know. This is our call for listener feedback. What would you like to hear? We want to make this show for you. And John, we started off this segment talking about the AppSec in 3 words. I thought 2023 in 3 words was a nice tie-in. Want to shift in 2024 to something slightly different that we're going to ask each of our guests. I thought we would maybe start this off for ourselves as a response to then see how our thinking changes over the year. So this year, we're dipping into yearbook-style superlatives. In other words, AppSec is most likely to, and then fill in the blank. And I've been making you go first every single time here, so maybe I'll go first this time around. For my response to kick off the year would be AppSec is most likely to be replaced by something effective. And I'm trying to figure out effective, useful, productive, but AppSec should, in a way, be trying to work itself out of a job, to be honest, work its way into obscurity. And I'm trying to figure out how to phrase that properly. So it is not just purely like AppSec sucks, but more of AppSec needs to evolve into something else. So most likely to be replaced by something effective. That's what I'm going with, at least to start us off this year.
Mine's basic. At first, it might sound like a cop-out. It's not meant to be. But what it was AppSec is most likely to improve. And by which, I mean, I've started this off saying like, hey, we see all these vendors. I won't go there. I've got the mouth clutch engaged today. But we've seen a lot of sort of, good and bad things over the years. We've seen some rants from me at the end of years going like, oh my God, I can't believe this is still a thing. but I think we are generally improving. And the cringe on my face is when you started talking about this, it was like, okay, if I say that, is there some chance at the end of the year I'm actually going to regret saying that AppSec is most likely to improve? I don't think so. I hope not. I think that'd be a really bad place.
That's not.
But yeah, it's basic. It's simple. It's. I'm going to say it's got European simplicity to it, but that's where I'm going to try and stay. Is yeah.
I like it, and we've recorded it now, so the clock is ticking for AppSec to improve. Listeners, this is your homework for the week. Let's get started.
And we need at least 5 more OWASP top 10s.
And on that note, John, I think you've helped us wrap up a wonderful segment. Thank you once again for helping me kick off the year and helping our listeners. Happy New Year's to you, John. Happy New Year's to all of our listeners. Happy New Year's to Akira. We're going to have her back as well throughout the year. She just couldn't make it here today. We're going to take that quick break now and return with some news. And who knows if that news is going to be some disappointing or not for John. We'll see what things we hit. We'll return with news of the week in just a moment. Thanks, everyone.